Hello and welcome to the Work Inspired podcast. I'm your host, George Lucas Pfeiffer, and on today's episode, we've got another incredible guest. I've been looking forward to this episode for a very long time. Jeremiah Knight is the COO at Saatchi Saatchi, one of the world's largest and leading ad agencies. Jeremiah and his team are doing some incredible things with transformational technology like AI. Today, we're going to pick his brain and unpack some techniques, some insights, and some tactics that you can use at your organization. Work Inspired starts right now. Jeremiah, thank you so much for being with us today. So excited to have you on the show and to talk a little bit about some of the exciting things you're doing at Saatchi Saatchi and some of the interesting developments in technology and AI that we're now living with.
Very happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me on.
So every guest that we have on the show, we have them start by kind of telling us their professional story, to kind of how did they get to what they're doing today? What would yours be?
Mine is a bit meandering. I started out in higher education after leaving college. I actually worked in my alma mater for a little while and was interested in education. And then that sort of led to opportunities with some venture-backed startups, including one which was Edmunds.com in the 1990s. Edmunds was focused on consumer empowerment around fair prices to pay for new and used vehicles, sort of adjacent to education, but still a little bit about education. And from there, early 2000s, ad agencies, as they were expanding their digital departments, started looking for people that knew what was called the in-market automotive space, which is what Edmunds represented. And suddenly, those of us that had been there started receive some calls from ad agencies. I never anticipated going into the ad world, but that's how I made my way in. Joined Chiat, eventually helped lead the Nissan and Infinity digital business, and then from there moved into the Saatchi network in around 2009.
Okay, great. Talk to me a little bit about what Saatchi Saatchi does. I know some of our listeners will be familiar with your agency, but what do you do? What makes you unique?
Sure. So Saatchi Saatchi is a full-service advertising agency. One of the things that's sort of unique about Saatchi is that there was a period of time in the ad world where there was a divestment of media companies from inside the creative agency, and the movement of those media companies into larger holding companies, for example, OMD within Omnicom, as a separate media buying division, helped to create media buying power. But one of the things it started to do is erode a little bit, this is subjective, but erode a little bit the ability for the media ideas to be coherent with the creative ideas. Saatchi never went through that divestment. And so we have a fully integrated team, meaning that we've got media, everything from enterprise class websites to media to full creativity for advertising solutions. So that's Saatchi Saatchi. In the United States, our CEO is Chuck McGuy, and our largest business is probably with the Toyota company, TM&A, and our offices are Los Angeles, Dallas, Seattle, and New York, where we also have some additional businesses as well.
Very cool. So when you think of an ad agency, you think of a lot of creative people, right?
Yep.
And then when you think of a COO, you think business, logistics, operations. How does a COO operate within a very creative world like a Saatchi Saatchi agency?
Good question. So I think, other COOs may have different answers to this, but what I'm focused on is trying to sort of smooth out workload peaks and troughs. I'm focused on forecasting the right personnel for the right period of time. Focused on ways that free us up to make the making of work a little bit more easy. I also have both the production and analytics departments that report into me. And so from the standpoint of advanced analytics, we're sort of constantly asking the question, how can we make what we've done better? And how can we improve upon things for the future? And then from the standpoint of production, we're really looking at how do we create alchemy with our creative teams and turn something which starts as an idea into something magical when a consumer finally sees it.
Very cool. And I think relevant to some of what we'll be talking about in a little bit, but sticking on the company specifically, talk a little bit about the culture at Saatchi Saatchi. What's it like to work for your organization?
Sure. Saatchi is very, very people-oriented. I think that you actually asked earlier, what's something that is a differentiator for us. And I think, we have a focus, which is the development of people who are brilliant in technology, culture, and persuasion. It's part of our purpose. And I think, many other ad agencies focus on outcomes, whether that's awards in the industry, industry recognition by CMOs. But our sort of way of looking at it is that while those things may be ultimately important to make a dent in the industry, what's far more important is the quality of our people, their careers, creating sort of the environment that allows them to be the best versions of themselves. And when we do that, the rest will sort of take care of itself. So that's the culture of Saatchi very much.
Yeah, I spent some time on your website in preparation for this, and that was prevalent. You could tell that there was a lot of pictures of team and people, and it seems prioritized when you look at your brand.
Thank you.
Talk about your current way of working. Are you guys in a hybrid working arrangement? I know you listed some offices, but what's the current structure?
Yep, we are definitely hybrid. We've actually, starting almost 2 years ago, we started to make a priority of being in person roughly 2 to 3 days a week. Right now, 3 days a week is sort of where we've landed, Tuesday through Thursday, generally speaking. Monday and Friday, we tend to be at home. I will say that one of the things that's really important about being in person in the creative industry is there's a certain type of collaboration. Excuse me, sorry.
No problem.
Didn't realize that was going to happen. A certain type of collaboration and a certain type of creative inspiration, serendipity perhaps, that happens much better in person, and it's really difficult to create that purely in an online environment. And the second thing I'd say is that from the standpoint of the development of people brilliant in technology, culture, and persuasion, we have heard again and again and again from our younger employees that one of the things they desire the most is to learn through osmosis, to be in the room when the conversations are happening, where we're really interrogating the work, and they have the chance to sort of learn and grow through those conversations. And can it be done remotely? Yes. Is it done best remotely? Definitely not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we just released a study, and we're having conversations with business leaders all the time because we're in the business of creating workspaces. So it's been pretty clear for the last couple of years that leaders have wanted to get back in person more frequently, but it was sometimes a challenge to convince their teams to do so. And some research that we just did with senior college students that will be graduating and entering the workforce in the near future, it's showing that they do have a strong desire to be in person. And I think that's mostly because they experienced some of their college career fully remote and had firsthand experience with how much better it was to learn in person compared to from a computer, from a dorm room or from their home. So we're hopeful that we're seeing some of that intent from the emerging workforce saying, yeah, we want to get back together. But I think to your point, there's also value in the flexibility, and we're seeing 3 seems to be the magic number right now from a lot of the companies we're talking about. Let's talk a little bit about AI. I mean, we're going to talk a lot about AI. I think most of our questions are centered around that, but you talked about the future, you talked about efficiencies. How do we do things maybe better than we've done in the past? Talk a little bit about your perception of AI, the impact it can have. This is a hot topic for us this season of the podcast. Everyone's talking about it and everyone has a different opinion. So I'd be interested to know what yours is.
Sure. I fully expect that my opinion on this is going to change as the years progress. I sort of look forward to, as we talk about it today, I'll want to come back to this and sort of see what I said so that I can determine how much I was right or not. But so my belief is that it's still very much in its infancy, but growing quickly. I think it currently exists as a tool, much like Photoshop or even email. It's a tool for creativity, for productivity, for efficiency. I think the idea of job replacement, at least in the immediate future, is wildly overblown. I think that as we've been seeing people toying with it, first of all, there are some legal issues, which I'm sure we'll get into later, that make it sort of difficult to just use it out the box. But then beyond that, I think what you're seeing is sort of a speeding up of putting ideas on a page, creatives using it as a sparring partner, if you will, more so than the idea of it fully replacing people. The other thing I guess I'd like to mention, it just happened that earlier this week we had a researcher, Dr. Biba Birhane, who's a cognitive scientist, talking about the ethical limitations of AI, and she really raised sort of a picture of the fact of the inherent bias in the data sets used for the ML models, which, if you're just a casual user of those generative AI tools, you probably don't think about very much. But it does, for me, raise concerns about the idea that any work product we create might have inherent bias in it, not because we intended for that to happen, but by virtue of the fact that it's, the data sets that are being sucked in are inequitable. So that's an interesting little side note.
Yeah, so tell me, how are your creative teams currently using it? What tools are they actually using, and
Sure.
are there some that they are shying away from, or others that they're getting excited about? I'm a marketing guy, so I'm very interested to know to know what you guys are up to.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many answers to this question. As we meander down it, feel free to push me back towards a different direction if we meander too far off course. So in terms of how they're using it, I mean, I would say probably the biggest use case right now is the use of things like Stable Diffusion, Dolly for rapid image generation, and they're using it mostly as a sparring partner. So, example, copywriter who never before did comps for themselves can now begin to play around with the idea of, I'm going to put together some storyboards and some comps to get my idea across. An art director who's never written copy before might throw some things into ChatGPT and output something which approximates the idea they're trying to get across. Then they'll share it with each other. And historically, copywriter, art director, team working together will generate those materials jointly. And now they're sort of riffing on each other, but also riffing on their own ideas amongst themselves with ChatGPT or Dolly or any of the other generative AI engines. So we're definitely seeing that happen. Midjourney is a big, from an image perspective, Midjourney is one that I think people really appreciate because you have sort of more granular control over the final output. And then I guess I would say that we're also sort of seeing what we're not seeing yet is a lot of final produced work from Gen AI. We can get into why that's the case, but we are definitely seeing an adoption, and we've heard the word prompt engineer come up, and we actually hired our first official prompt engineer. But setting that aside, the reality is that I think a lot of these art directors and copywriters that have natural curiosity are becoming their own prompt engineers, and it's sort of a new tool in their toolkit to help spur creativity.
Well, you talked about one of the values of being in person was this creative collaboration that's able to happen when people are together. And when you think about a copywriter using AI to storyboard, for example, are you finding the result of that less collaboration because they're just trying to do it themselves, or is it more removal of bottlenecks so that when the collaboration is, it's a better or more effective collaboration?
I'd say it's the latter. It's more a speeding of the idea to the page so that then the partners can interrogate the idea, maybe even look at different angles on the idea. And I would even hazard, the more that they have a chance to do that and really look at these different angles on it, that they may even make the ideas better. And it's not replacing collaboration whatsoever. It really is just sort of more speeding an idea to a page so that then they can have spirited discussion around it.
Interesting. And then when you think of what is the value that your firm brings to a client is that creative IP, basically, right? So when you start using these sometimes open source AI tools, do you worry about that? I mean, how much are you thinking about creating something that's exclusive to Saatchi versus something that's available to everybody, but then we're going to layer on the Saatchi secret sauce to make it special?
Great question. I mean, so this actually gets into the reasons why I think there are some limitations for what we can and can't do yet, and also why job replacement isn't immediately on the horizon. So first of all, I mean, this probably won't be news to you. I'm guessing it's definitely not, but many of the AI companies have been sued by IP holders, and the claim basically is, listen, you've sucked in my IP illegally. I didn't give you permission to use it to train your model, and therefore, I think the courts are going to be choked with these types of sort of test cases, and so we will see at some point whether or not the courts agree that the IP can't be essentially scraped, much as a web crawler might scrape it, and then used by the ML model. But in the meantime, until those are all sort of make their way through the legal system, the challenge we have is anything we create, even if we inadvertently create something that might infringe on someone else's IP, there could be a claim against us, and the liability is real, or at least it could potentially be real. So, for now, anytime a prompt engineer or a creative, if they wanted to make something in a final state using Gen AI, we have to supply all of our prompts to our legal department, and they have to look through it and make sure that we didn't explicitly put anyone's IP in there so that there's no infringement. So for bad example, but draw something in the likeness of Andy Warhol. Can't do that. That's owned by the Warhol estate probably, and so we have to make sure that none of that stuff is in there. And then even in the final outcome, if the images that have been scraped originally, I'll use a bad example, but let's say that Nike has a bunch of shoes that were scraped, and we asked for an image of a person to be created, and on that person, the Nike symbol appears, whether on the apparel or on the shoe, whatever it is. Nike can make a claim, I didn't give you the right to use my likeness in your final composition. So these things are all really gray space, and makes it so it's a little bit of a dangerous, final outcome for us. So this is why I think we're not seeing a lot of final work being done with Gen AI. Anyway, so that's sort of the legal perspective on it, but there's also sort of this aspect of the fact that the ML models, anything you feed to them becomes part of its learning model. And so one way around that, and this is something that our parent company, Publicis, owns Saatchi and Saatchi, actually did, is they created a relationship with OpenAI where the API that we receive, and we can use, we can sort of attach their API to a front end and then allow our creatives to play with it. We can submit to the model sensitive information related to our clients, because it is destructive. It won't, when it goes into the model, it is acted upon by the model, but then the information that we submitted to it is destroyed, so it doesn't become part of the learning engine. But if you're just using those engines on the open web, the reality is that anything you feed into it becomes part of its learning system. So, as an individual, as a consumer, if I'm putting my own images in there or my own IP, I wrote a story or something, you've now just trained the model with your IP. So all of these things are reasons why I think it makes it a bit more difficult to use for final product right now.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think through all the scenarios. I mean, we had the CMO for Alaska Airlines on once, and we were talking about Super Bowl ads and translating those over to TikTok back when, and obviously TikTok's still highly popular, but we were talking about the legality of a large company advertising on TikTok and using this, the music basically that everybody uses, and the licensing. Yep. But you layer that example into AI, there's exponentially, like you just said, all these examples you have to consider. So it seems like there's a lot of personal use maybe out there, and then a company the size of Publicis, with all of its organizations like Saatchi and Leo Burnett and all the agencies that it owns, maybe there is a scenario where output stuff is better served if Publicis runs its own AI that is legally vetted, so that you're not running into those risks. But from an operations perspective, and the way that you would describe some of your teams working cross-functionally, that is internal. So is that kind of how it's most prominently being used currently, is trying to speed up internal processes and teams?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so let me answer this sort of three ways. So number one is sort of how individuals are using it, just sort of as a sparring partner. Again, not for final product, but just to get ideas to the page. I think number two, from the standpoint of tools that we've begun to embrace that have some amount of Gen AI included in them that help speed things along as well. And then I think number three, maybe from the standpoint of the larger agreements, like the one that we were deciding for Publicis. So on the first level, far and away, the most usage of Gen AI on the agency is I think people using it for not for personal use, but rather as that sparring partner. Now, the safest way to do that goes to the third example, which is if I don't want to give anything proprietary about my client into a system that can then learn about that proprietary information, then you have to go through a destructive API so that it doesn't become part of the learning model. So that's where agreements with OpenAI at the Publicis level allow us to use it, access it, and riff in ways that aren't that maintain the sensitivity of the client agency relationship. And then the final way, the second way I was talking about is we have adopted some efficiency tools. Certainly things like what is it, Photoshop content aware fill, things like that help speed some things along in production. But also we have a tool for proofreaders. And the tool has embedded some Gen AI in it that if as they're looking through the copy that's been written, and they see, oh, this sentence is a little bit tortured, they can sort of click on the sentence, and what it'll do is give them four alternate versions that it's pinged, quickly to. I think this one's ChatGPT enabled, but basically it pings it quickly to ChatGPT, gives you four alternative sentences. You can send all four to a copywriter and say, hey, which of these four is better? The sentence you wrote originally, I get the gist of it, but it's just a little bit tortured. So what would you like to do with that? So we've got tools like that. And then we actually created a bit of a partnership with a company called Lucy.ai. And Lucy's sort of reason for being is it understands that the way that we store things in the enterprise is distributed all over the place. Like you got stuff in Box, stuff in Google Drive, stuff in our digital asset management system, and we've got critical things all over the place, and it's really hard to find the good stuff. So if we were to ask ourselves the question, what could we learn from what we've done previously? And especially if there's historical knowledge that might need to be passed on to younger employees who maybe haven't launched this product or launched that product. Lucy AI's whole function is help sort through all of that stuff and find the needles in the haystack. And they've created a really cool chatbot that exists in Microsoft Teams that allows you to ask those questions in Teams, get a chat response back. A card comes up with the location of the top hits of where it thinks those things are, and then you can click through and find those things anywhere in your ecosystem. So these are sort of like enterprise level uses of generative AI that you wouldn't necessarily immediately run to, because of course in the press most of what you're seeing is image creation or deep fakes and things like that.
And I've been wondering how long will it be before we're at a place where you're talking on the organizational level, it's something personal to the organization. It knows the DNA of the company. It knows where the files are. It knows where the needles in the haystack are.
Right.
How long before you think we each have one of those personally? Kind of like our own AI assistant.
Oh, that's a good one. I actually think it's going to be faster than we might expect, and I also think that we're seeing huge advancements in the space related to generative AI interacting with voice. So did you watch Her, the movie Her?
No, I did not. No.
Okay, so I think that's what it was. Anyway, I think it's actually going to be faster than we expect. So I'm going to guess within 6 months.
Wow.
We will have the possibility of personal assistants like Siri interacting with voice, but with capabilities substantially greater than what Siri provides to us today.
Yeah, and that's when you talk about a six month window. I mean, like that's very soon. But Accenture just came out with a report saying the capabilities are doubling every 3.5 to 10 months. So if you think of
moving very
quickly, which is probably why we've got people saying let's slow down a little bit, right? But that's fascinating. And I think one of the fears that people have, and you alluded to it earlier, and you said you don't think it's anytime soon, but job replacement being the future. What are some of the ways in the creative world that you're looking at job creation? I know you just hired your first prompt engineer, and that is one that we've heard. Although what you said made me think maybe these people need legal backgrounds. But what are some of the jobs that you guys might be preparing for in the coming years?
Yeah. So I think definitely prompt engineer is one. Another area, and actually I've seen some creative examples of this. We didn't mention this when we were talking about creativity, but another use of Gen AI is connecting into an API and maybe doing some interesting creative mashup where consumers can play with the Gen AI themselves. The one that I saw recently I think it was a celebration of 50 years of hip hop, and I'm pretty sure it was whatever the team was that did Sprite. I'm not sure if this was done in-house or if it was done with an agency, but the whole idea was you answer some questions via ChatGPT based upon the things you love in hip hop, and it'll make its own generative AI-based hip hop artwork for you. So you get your own sort of unique artwork that's based upon your preferences. I will tell you that this is fully subjective. My own experience of that when I went through it was that the artwork itself was kind of disappointing. And the reason I say that is because they weren't actually able to use any of the IP of the original artists from the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s for the exact legal reasons we were talking about. So what it finally arrived at was sort of this slightly colorful, slightly referential to a decade thing that was mostly novel and didn't really reflect 50 years of hip hop. So anyway, I say that to say I applaud the idea behind it, which is they took the APIs, they put it into an advertising context, a microsite where consumers can interact with it, and they created something fully novel out of it. So I expect that we will also, I mentioned at the top that Saatchi has, enterprise class website teams as well. We will probably have teams that are expert at manipulating the APIs and creating front-end experiences for consumers, whether that's a microsite like I just described, or it's some sort of an advanced chat engine that is specific around certain content. You can imagine these types of things beginning to arrive.
Yeah, it's very interesting to think about. And another thing that has perplexed me a little bit, I understand that there's certain data sets that go in and there's a certain amount of machine learning, or it's always building on itself. But these prompts, at least at the consumer level, we're not writing code, right? We're writing sentences mostly, and they're pretty short. So how unique is what comes out from me when I ask a question versus 1,000 other people that ask the same question? Are we all getting the same answer, or do we get somewhat of a unique answer because of the place and time through which we asked it?
That's a great question. I actually don't know the answer to that. I think we might need to talk to an AI engineer to understand what is the degree of difference between the answers that get generated. But you make a great point. I mean, the models are only as strong as the information that they feed upon. And one of the areas hadn't mentioned this yet, but one of the areas that we do see some amazing things in Gen AI space is that it's exceptionally good at taking material from, let's say, a GitHub or a location where there's a code repository. And if you say, hey, I need to create a function that does these things, we're seeing it then turn back a full set of code, which you can then take and compile and actually use as your own code. That's obviously coming from a place of commons. But my guess is that if I gave it the same prompt and you gave it the same prompt, we would get exactly the same function back. But that is more predictable because it's about writing code in a certain way. So I do think there probably will be some similarities in the answers, and actually to that point, creatively going back to the art directors and copywriters, the more that they differ in the prompts that they use, the more creative that they are basically in the way that they try to get the engine to comply, the more as a tool it creates outputs which are unique to that user. My guess. So this is where I think that the intersection between creativity and the fact of the need for humans to still provide that lens is so critical. You're not seeing a scenario where it's just making things on its own. And
I also think when I first heard prompt engineering, I was thinking of a single action. But I think a big piece of it, probably near and dear to your heart, is the process through which you build on that action will become more and more unique. Right. Because you ask one thing, we might all get the same answer, but then I might ask a follow up. And what made me think about that is you say coding. Once it's ready to build apps, and build, microsites and basically say, I have this idea, make it a reality for me, which I know you're already experiencing in your space from a creative perspective, but as it gets into coding and app building and some of the things that really just haven't not been approachable to most people and even most businesses, I think it's going to unleash a new wave of innovation and entrepreneurship and creativity that we haven't seen before. So I think that's really exciting, actually.
I agree. I also think it tends to be particularly excellent at simple, repeatable tasks, and that's where I think we see high efficiency come in. I mean, I think the copywriting example where a proofreader taking a look at a tortured sentence and having 4 different sentences to then choose from is a good example of that. But any task that's repeatable, where it can sort of speed up the task for you. I'll give you an example. One of the things we do is a lot of note taking in client meetings, for example, and we need to summarize them and turn them back to the clients. ChatGPT is amazing at summarizing and giving, 4 or 5 clear bullet points about what the subject was about and, what things were covered in the meeting. So those types of repeatable, more mundane uses, I think also will take off.
And I think, I mean, from a written and a text perspective, I think it's much further ahead than most people thought it would be. I think many of us have seen the 60 Minutes where it wrote that wonderful poem, and it's just so capable at written word. And I think it's getting into code now. The other side seems to be progressing very quickly too, which is the visual medium, whether it's photo or video or generating images. How long do you think before I could be having this conversation with a very real looking Jeremiah Knight that's an AI?
Well, that's a great question. I'm going to have to go out and do a little bit of conjecture here, but actually, as it happens, one of our executive creative directors was just showing me a model that he had downloaded. And so, one of the things that's interesting about this. Sorry, I'm going to take a bit of a tangent.
Sure.
I'll come back around to that question. One of the things that's interesting about this is that, a year ago, all these models were happening mostly in the online space, and the compute power was all in the online space. Massive servers helping us to do all the computing necessary to generate these things. But now you're actually finding that as they've trained the models, they can create smaller and smaller versions, even some that can run locally. So this executive creative director had just downloaded essentially a deepfake engine. It allows you to replace yourself with a talking head using the imagery of somebody else that you want to replace into your space. So it is not perfect. It looked more like a blend between him and the person he was trying to impersonate. As I told him, it sort of looked like he and this person had a baby together, and that this was the person who was talking to me. But it was convincing enough from the standpoint of the mouth movement and so forth that it was actually a little staggering that he was able to do that on his desktop. So I say that because that still is very limited processing power. If the fact that he can take a pre-recorded video and replace himself, his image, with somebody else's face and make it look relatively realistic today on his laptop or his desktop, I imagine, easily within 6 months, again, you'll see, me being able to respond in real time, but be replaced with an avatar of somebody else's skin.
And I think it's more significant than it seems because, during the pandemic, I always thought, we're all on these Zoom and Teams meetings, but we are never really looking at each other because I'm looking at you, you're looking at me. It's weird to look right into the lens of the camera that's on the computer and maintain eye contact because we don't see anything other than the lens of the camera. But I thought if we can get to a place where our avatars are fairly lifelike, all the camera needs to do is track our face and we can really look at the screen, or maybe we don't even need to have a camera. It can be somewhere else in the room and we don't have to worry about placement of camera above or below in conference rooms. And I think it's got some implications for the way we connect people in a space and with people that are remote, which in the world of workspaces and offices, that's pretty top priority right now. So I'm pretty excited for what those advancements will mean. Even if right now people are saying, well, I'd like to be a cat while I'm on a Teams call.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I'm fascinated by that. I'm also fascinated by what will humans do with that? Because, inevitably how creative people will take a look at using tools like that is always different than you might imagine. Like the engineer has one use case in mind, and then people come in and just do completely different things with it. So I'll be fascinated to sort of see how that shakes out.
Are you having your clients ask for guidance on AI? Are you guys, I mean, I could even imagine that maybe being a new division or new service offering that an agency would offer to clients is how to integrate AI, whether they're client-facing or internal processes at organizations.
Yeah, one of the things I absolutely love about being in the advertising space is that about every 6 months we have something new that we have to learn. Once upon a time there was no such thing as social media, and then you have to figure out how to be fluent in social media. Early social media was all about organic interactions. Later social media was all about the power of personalization at scale. New social channels and platforms come online like TikTok that have a completely different medium and sort of a different sensibility, and you have to become fluent in those. So it's actually a pretty common space for advertising agencies to be in, to need to be able to advise their clients on this new thing that we now sort of need to get our heads wrapped around. And usually there's a maturity curve where you have sort of the early adopter moment where they're not usually asking about it. It's usually either early or late majority, where as it starts to gain prominence and there's enough eyeballs on that specific thing, that it starts to A, become in the news and in the zeitgeist, and B, actually is a real mechanism for reach and for scale. That's when the advertisers tend to then start to ask about it. So it's a common thing for us to do this. I don't, it's interesting. I don't know if it'd be a new division and a new offering per se, except that, especially because I think Gen AI is going to affect so many sides of the business, so many pieces of it. It's almost like, where do you start? But it is absolutely true that they're asking for, how are we supposed to think about this? How are we supposed to incorporate it in our own business practice? How are our lawyers supposed to think about it? All that novelness needs some amount of guidance. And sometimes we're great at giving that guidance, and sometimes they need to talk to other lawyers to not their creative agency to figure some of that stuff out.
And I'm assuming, kind of like I'm asking you a million questions right now, there's a level of education that needs to happen, and a little some understanding and level setting, because it's so new and changing so quickly that I'm guessing some of your clients and stakeholders are like, I don't even know what to know right now, right? So help me understand this before we agree to some project or.
And some clients are, really wildly open to taking massive risks and just taking a swing for the fences and see what happens. And, legal be damned. Let's see what happens. Others are more about, mitigating risk. So it really depends on their temperament as a client and the degree to which they want to sort of open up a new avenue for themselves. I'll go back to the social media example. Actually, this will date me, but I remember when we had an emerging media team in the early 2000s, and we were taking a look at things like DVRs and TiVo and thinking like this was something really novel and unique that we needed to figure out how to do advertising on. And that seems so quaint comparative to the AI topic now. It's sort of mind-boggling. But anyway, anyway, I'll leave it at that.
It's clear that you're incredibly passionate about it. It's exciting on our end, but you're really living in it. And I mean, I think I can imagine it's very exciting to be working with people and around people that are at the forefront of unpacking some of this stuff and looking ahead at some of these opportunities. And especially, it's not like you're looking 10 years out. You're 6 months out, right? You're looking at tomorrow or even today.
That's right.
So I appreciate the perspective. And like you, I'm interested to re-listen to this in 6 months and see how spot on you were.
Right,
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
We always finish each conversation with a couple common questions that we ask every guest, and they're really more recommendation type questions for some of our listeners that are looking to learn from your experience and the success that you've had. Has there been a resource that has been especially valuable to you in your career that you could recommend to others?
Oh, absolutely. So I think the first one I would recommend would be, I'm a huge fan of Rashad Tabakawala. He is, if you've not read his blog, which I believe is called The Future Does Not Fit into the Containers of the Past. But anyway, Rashad Tabakawala, full disclosure, he was a part of the Publicis Directoire. He's no longer, I think he's retired from Publicis, but so he's in our network. So I'm not touting him simply because he used to be in our network, but he has a way of being prescient about the trends that are sort of happening in the digital landscape. But he's also really prescient about topics related to leadership. And I love reading, every week I look forward to his e-newsletter. He publishes on his blog and then it sends out automatically. And it's usually a fantastic read and a good reminder of, some of the things you need to do to be a good leader, but also to be relevant in the industry today. So he's one. Actually just today read, Professor Galloway has a great blog and newsletter as well. And he's always interesting to read. The one today I think was about Netflix. But that's a really good one. And then I would say also Stratechery, it's hard to pronounce exactly, but it's supposed to be a strategy, Stratechery, but it's Stratechery. Anyway, this is a blog as well that's all about sort of strategy in the context of the advertising and marketing space. And so if you want good understanding of trends in advertising and marketing, that would be one I would point to.
Thank you. Appreciate that, those recommendations. Yeah. What is something that you're excited about in the next 12 months? And it can be professional or personal.
Well, now I'm really excited to look back at this and see how wrong I got.
It's a good answer.
Let's see. Personal. I've been on a big sort of health kick related to biking, cycling. So next year, right around this time, I'm hoping to do a tour, a fundraising tour for the Fireflies, which is a cycling club that I joined. They typically do a tour from San Francisco to Los Angeles, which is bigger than anything I've ever tried to do before. So I think I'm excited about that one.
That's awesome. I got into cycling too during the pandemic, and unfortunately I'm in Chicagoland, so my season is ending, but I'll be on the Peloton while you're outside biking in the beautiful California winter weather.
That was my roadway into it as well. I was biking and doing the Peloton a bunch. Then finally I sort of said, you know what, I think I need to get out of my garage. And that was the pathway into cycling.
Beautiful. Our final question is always the same. If you were going to retire tomorrow, what is one piece of advice that you'd leave for your team?
You know, I think what a wonderful question. I think that my conception of leadership has changed so radically over the years. I think when you're young, it's easy to look at leadership as being somebody who is whip smart and sort of leads on high from the standpoint of issuing sort of clever edicts from their pedestal, whatever their remit is. Whereas actually, I really think that leadership is about the idea of creating the conditions for the people around you to be the best versions of themselves, and you are only as good as your people, and that's it. It is as simple as that.
Very well said. And what a way to end this awesome conversation. I can't thank you enough for being so open and so insightful. It's been such a pleasure to learn from you, Jeremiah. Thank you for being on Work Inspired.
George, thanks so much for inviting me to the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to rate our show. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the Work Inspired podcast so that you don't miss any of the incredible guests we have planned for upcoming episodes. We'll continue to find the best and brightest minds in business so that you can learn, grow, and succeed, and so that we can all work inspired. Work Inspired is brought to you by BOS, a leader in commercial working environments and a Hayworth best-in-class dealership. Experience our 360 approach and discover the team, tools, and techniques required to navigate the complexity of your next workspace at BOS.com. If you have ideas, feedback, or would like to be featured on our show, please email podcast@BOS.com. Thank you for listening. This has been a Workspace digital production. If you're interested in launching a podcast at your organization, please email info@workspace.digital for a free consultation.